I'm Melanie Trailer, and today I'm just going to have a little chat with you about the chunky binding method. This has come back up. It comes up, every now and then, but it's coming up right now because we've created these binding kits. I just thought I'd talk to you about this binding method while we're restocking and making more kits and things like that. So first, let me show you what we're talking about. All right, so I used to only do handwork on the special quilts, and now this is the way I do my binding on every single quilt. So this one is honey pie, and I know I didn't really show it to you, did I? But here is that binding. All right, so it is just a running stitch, and it is easy, and anybody can do it. You don't need any kind of skills to do this. You just need to know how to do it. So, and the trickiest part is, burying the thread. That's it. And it really isn't hard at all. It's time consuming, but it's beautiful, and it's so nice to do. And I mean, I don't think I've ever put it on a quilt that I didn't like. All right, so that was honey pie. I'm just gonna throw these down. Here is, I don't know if you remember this, but this is that Dreamland quilt that I did not like. So don't judge it. There's a whole video about why I didn't like it. But this one has some high contrast between the stitches and the binding. So I tend to prefer solid as my binding. It's just kind of a go-to. It's not the only thing I'll use. I've used plenty of print fabrics. I have no problem with them. I particularly like stripes. But I usually tend to use solids more just because I find it easier to choose. I would never put a binding on with a big print. So I'm always either looking for a very, very tiny print, or I'm looking for a solid or a tiny geometric or something like that. But the actual stitching is what we're calling chunky binding method. You do it by hand. A quilt this size, and I think this is 60 by 68. A quilt this size will usually take me 2 to 3 evenings, and I'll spend maybe 2 hours each evening doing it. So 6-ish hours getting one of these quilts done. And break it up because it hurts your hands. If you do any kind of handwork, I'm sure you know, long enough, your hand is going to ache. And I have pushed it before, but usually I'm good breaking it up and spreading it out. It is the last moment you have with your quilt. So I don't know, there's something okay about letting it take as long as it takes. So everything about this goes on the same way as binding. You just change up your stitch. Everything else is the same. If you already know how to hand bind a quilt, you can pick this up. It is way easier than your traditional binding method. And I don't know, it's a little bit more forgiving. I get a lot of questions about does it hold up? And I have been using this method for several years now. I wash my quilts a lot, and I've never had any problem. All right, so this is kind of a high contrast color thread to binding, but I've done them all sorts of ways. I've done them with low contrast, I've done them blending, I've done them all kinds of ways. Let me see if I can find something else that looks like the same color. Here's one, another Dreamland quilt. Here's one that is much more subtle as far as my color choices. So very light, I think this is Bunny Hill pink, Bella Bunny Hill actually. And then I used a very cream looking thread. So it's very, very subtle, but I don't know, I just swoon every time I see the quilt binding. I mean, I just love it so very much. Just in case you're new to quilting, let me kind of detail binding. You sew binding with your machine onto the front of the quilt. This is called sewing the binding onto your quilt. And then you flip the binding over, it rolls over, hides those raw edges, and then you finish the binding on the back of your quilt. So, looks like that. Let me show you that corner. Kind of looks like that. They don't all look exactly the same. Like I said, very forgiving. I just try to make sure that one stitch crosses over on the corner. So I have a demo for this that's a free demo that you can watch. I'll put the link right below. I also have several video paid classes that kind of go into a lot of detail. So those are there for you too. But that is a lot more of a subtle choice with that thread. I like everything. Like, I like contrast, I like subtle, I like blending, I like all of it. I just think that when you see those stitches, they're just precious. I don't know why. When I first started quilting, my stitches were a little bit bigger. I like this size. This is the size that I'm always trying to get to. This one, that one may be a tiny smidgen a little bit bigger, or maybe it's just the contrast that's throwing me off. I prefer the little stitches, but as long as they're, you know, around 1/8, I don't fuss too much at myself. I just love it any way it comes. Let me see what else I got. All right, you can see that I'm putting solids on all the quilts I've shown you already. This quilt is Tangle. It's from my book Stash Work. And this one I used another high contrast, but I used a print fabric that was a tonal. So that is very, very high contrast. But again, it just adds this beautiful hand look that I just love to look at. And I love to touch and run my fingers across it. And, you know, again, I get excited when I turn over a quilt and see it. I'm basically doing every quilt this way now. It's been a few years since I've used machine binding. Like I said, I usually sit with these quilts, you know, in the evenings and, you know, turn on the television and just sit there and stitch while I watch. Yeah, so that's a high contrast. Let me show you the thread. All right, so right now we have 65 plus colors of DMC thread. And just in case you've never seen DMC thread before, it looks like this. These threads, they are number 8s. They are a thick, chunky. I've actually hand quilted one quilt before with it. I've used it for embroidery. I've used this for a lot of different stuff. This is my favorite thread that is thick. I use a Sashiko needle. I'm going to show you that in a minute, but I use the Sashiko needle because the thread is thicker. A Sashiko needle has a large eye, so it makes threading it easier. I know a lot of people don't like the Sashiko needle, so definitely use whatever needle you're comfortable with. But I just like that. I like that needle because it's really thick and it has a very, very big eye. I just find it easy to use. So these are our 20-piece balls. We also have 10-piece balls sets. So if you're interested in that, we have those available. You can find these in the DMC Thread section of our shop, but you can also find them in the binding kit section. So again, we have 65 different colors of these balls to choose from. When I was first building my own DMC ball collection, they call these pearl cotton balls. Let me just refer to them as pearl cotton balls. When I first started collecting them, I would just buy a handful at a time because, you know, they're $3 balls. So I bought a handful at a time, got myself a little bit of a collection going with some basic colors, and then I kind of just added them, you know, as I needed a different color, depending on, you know, what binding I'm using. But we have this 20-piece set available, you know, so that you can start instant collection. And we also have the 10. And let me show you one more thing that we have in the shop that's brand new. All right, this is the 6-piece binding kit. All right, and this is what it comes with. So first you get 3 of these colors. They're assorted colors, so they're random. But if you left me a note at checkout and told me that you don't want purple, I would not put purple in your box. So that we can customize it a little bit if you need us to. But you get 3 of these. You get the Sashiko needle. So there's that. Sashiko needle, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about with that thick needle and that big eye. It's easy to get that thick thread in this big needle, so that's why I like it. Plus, that's a lot of layers to be sewing through. And let me touch on that too in just a second. Let me go through the box first though. You also get these wonder clips. I use these for so many different things, but they come in the binding kit because I use them, you know, while binding. This is what holds down the binding, you know, as you're stitching it. So I think I've got 2 packs of these that I keep in my kit, but 10 will definitely get you started. And when you get your 10 completed, you just leapfrog them over and go all the way around. Then you get this. This is just a little tin, and it's something that I keep the binding clips, the Wonder clips in. So these I keep in here. That way I can just grab, you know, this, you know, a needle, the thread, the quilt, and then go have at the quilt. So you get all this with this kit. It'll definitely get you started if you don't have these supplies already. All right, so let me show you what I was talking about. I could show you more quilts, but I don't think I want to unfold them all. Let's see. That one's actually traditional binding, but the rest, okay, so I have like 7 quilts over here. One was traditional hand binding, and all the rest of them are this chunky hand stitch business. All right, so this is another question that I get all the time. I told you to sew the binding onto the front of your quilt, flip it over, and finish it on the back of your quilt. But I always get asked if those stitches go all the way through, and they don't. So when you're binding, you're only going through your binding, your double binding layers, and then you're going to pick up some of this back fabric and maybe a little bit of batting in there too. If you don't, it's fine. If you do, it's fine. But I don't ever want it to go, you know, on the top. And I think I have one quilt where I accidentally got it on the top. Let me go grab that. All right, I've recently gotten glasses. I've been having some vision issues. So when I was making this quilt, my eyes were burning, and I just kept making mistakes. I just kept making mistakes with it. So this one actually is Scrappy Binding. So there's the binding stitch on the back of the quilt. I'm just letting you know it's Scrappy Binding. That's why it's got multiple fabrics. But on the front of the quilt, I accidentally let it go through the quilt top. So there's a couple of places that have that stitch. There's a couple of, that man is so crazy. There's a couple of places where I stitched all the way through, and I was so mad at myself. So if you can catch this as you're binding, if you can catch it, you know, you can pull it out and then just keep going. But if you get to the end of the quilt and you've done that, there's no fixing it. I mean, I'm sure that you could fix it, but it would be a lot of trouble. So I've decided that I can live with imperfections. But anyway, thought I'd share that. So at Meander and Make, like I said, we have 65 plus colors, plus these 3 kits that you could buy if you are interested. And I have a demo for how to chunky bind. So if you're interested in that, there's a link right below this video where you can, you know, have a look, see if you can do this. I know that you can do it. It's just a matter of if you want to do it. Do you like slow work, or do you like finishing up a quilt by hand? I think it's really, really pretty, and I'm pretty much doing it on every single thing I make that is quilty. I do it on pillows, I do it on runners, I'm doing it on everything. And actually, when I make it when I put it on a pillow, I reverse it. So instead of sewing it where the stitching is on the back of the quilt, when it's a pillow or a runner, I reverse that so that the stitching is on the front of the quilt. So just something extra. And I have a couple of paid classes over at my quilt class website where you can see me doing just that. All right, so let me know if you have questions. Let me know what you thought about the binding. I will see you next time.